Picture a world where the air itself feels different on your skin. Thicker, warmer, charged with something we've lost. A world where continents haven't quite found their modern positions yet. Where ocean currents flow in patterns that would baffle today's meteorologists. And where life informs both familiar and utterly alien, has found ways to exist at scales that defy everything we think we know about biological limits. Now picture a creature, not particularly large by the standards of its time. Perhaps 15 feet long, walking on two powerful legs, arms shortened but equipped with grasping claws. Its eyes are sharp, binocular, calculating. It's hunting. And what makes this moment extraordinary isn't the hunt itself. Predation is as old as life, but rather what this creature represents. It's a snapshot of an evolutionary experiment, so successful, so fundamentally revolutionary, that its descendants would eventually conquer the skies and, much later, sing outside your bedroom window at dawn. Welcome to the Jurassic. And I promise you, everything you think you know about this period is about to become infinitely more strange, more beautiful, and more relevant to your own existence than you ever imagined. Before we dive in, please consider subscribing and liking this video. Your support truly helps us continue this work. Thank you. Here's something most people never consider. The Jurassic Period lasted roughly 56 million years. To put that in perspective, the entire story of recognizable human beings, from our first stone tools to our smartphones, spans maybe 2.5 million years at most. The Jurassic alone ran for more than 20 times that length, 20 times our entire human story. That's not just deep time, that's oceanic time. And during those 56 million years, life didn't just survive. It experimented, diversified, and pushed into territories that would make modern evolutionary biologists weep with envy. But here's the puzzle that should keep you awake at night. Why then? What was it about that particular window of Earth's history that allowed life to run wild in ways it hasn't quite managed since? The answer isn't simple, and it certainly isn't just about dinosaurs being big and impressive. The answer is woven into the planet itself, into its atmosphere, its oceans, its very geology. The Jurassic wasn't just a time period, it was a planetary condition. Let's start with something concrete, something you can hold in your mind's eye. It's dawn in what will one day be Wyoming. But forget everything you know about Wyoming winters. There are no snow-capped peaks here, no freezing winds howling across empty plains. Instead, you're standing at the edge of a vast floodplain, where a river the size of the Amazon meanders through forests of conifers and cycads. The temperature, even at this early hour, is already climbing past 80 degrees Fahrenheit. By midday, it'll push into the high 90s. And this isn't summer. This is every day. Because in the Jurassic, there's no ice anywhere on Earth. Not at the poles. Not on the highest mountains. Nowhere. The planet, quite simply, is warm. Not warm like a nice beach vacation. Warm like a hothouse. Global average temperatures run somewhere between 10 and 15 degrees Fahrenheit higher than today. The poles, both of them, support forests. Antarctica grows trees. Let that sink in for a moment. Antarctica, with trees. But temperature alone doesn't create a revolution. What matters is what that warmth does to everything else. Start with the oceans. Today's oceans are layered things. Cold, dense water at the bottom, warmer water on top, with relatively little mixing between them. It's stable, predictable, and it creates distinct zones of life. The Jurassic oceans don't work that way. With no polar ice caps to generate cold bottom water, the entire ocean circulates differently. Warmer water reaches the deep sea. Nutrients cycle in different patterns. And the result is an ocean that's simultaneously more productive and more dangerous than anything we know today. Marine reptiles, ichthyosaurs built like dolphins but the size of buses, long-necked plesiosaurs, massive pliosaurs with skulls that could engulf a grand piano. These aren't aberrations. They're the natural expression of an ocean system running at full throttle. Now look up. The atmosphere itself is different. Not radically. You could breathe Jurassic air without difficulty, but meaningfully. Oxygen levels hover around 26% compared to today's 21%. That might not sound like much, but it's the difference between a candle flame and a blowtorch. With more oxygen available, metabolisms can run hotter, faster, more energetically. Insects can grow larger without suffocating. Active, warm-blooded animals, and yes, we'll get to that controversy, can sustain higher activity levels without gasping for breath. Carbon dioxide levels tell an even more interesting story. They're roughly 4 to 5 times higher than today's pre-industrial levels. Now, before anyone panics or politicizes, understand what this means in the Jurassic context. Plants, especially the conifers and ferns that dominate this world, thrive in high CO2 environments. They grow faster, larger, more productively. And at the base of every food chain, you'll find plants. More productive plants mean more herbivores. More herbivores mean more predators. The entire biomass of the planet increases. Life, in aggregate, simply weighs more during the Jurassic than it does today. But here's where it gets truly fascinating. All of this, the warmth, the oxygen, the carbon dioxide, the ice-free poles, isn't random. It's the result of something that's been happening for millions of years and will continue for millions more. The supercontinent of Pangaea, which dominated the late Paleozoic, is breaking apart. Imagine a jigsaw puzzle in reverse. Pangaea, that great landmass where nearly all of Earth's continents had been fused together, is rifting. Cracks are opening. Magma is welling up from the mantle. New ocean crust is forming. And as this happens, as these titanic plates grind and separate and create new seaways, something remarkable occurs. Volcanic activity on a scale that's hard to fathom. These aren't the explosive volcanic eruptions we see today, the Mount St. Helens variety that makes headlines. This is something slower, more persistent, and ultimately more powerful. Long fissures in the crust continuously pour out basaltic lava. In some places, these flood basalts cover areas the size of small countries. And with that, lava comes gas. Tremendous quantities of carbon dioxide, released from the mantle, pumped into the atmosphere year after year, century after century, millennium after millennium. This is the engine of the Jurassic greenhouse. It's not a catastrophe. Not yet, anyway. It's a steady state. The planet has found a new equilibrium, one that will persist, with variations, for tens of millions of years. And in this equilibrium, life finds opportunities that simply don't exist in cooler, more seasonal worlds. Consider what a warm, stable climate means for a large animal. Today's elephants, the largest land animals we have, face a serious problem. They generate enormous amounts of metabolic heat, and they live in environments that can range from quite hot to quite cold. Managing body temperature becomes a limiting factor. But in the Jurassic, where temperature gradients are gentler, where winters barely exist, and even the poles are mild, large size becomes less problematic. There's no need to hibernate, no need to migrate long distances to avoid killing cold. A 30-ton sauropod can afford to be 30 tons because the planet itself is accommodating. And this brings us to the creatures themselves. The cast of characters that make the Jurassic not just interesting, but iconic. Let's begin on the ground, with the animals that capture everyone's imagination, the dinosaurs. By the Jurassic, dinosaurs have been around for roughly 30 million years. They survived the brutal Triassic-Jurassic extinction event that wiped out many of their competitors, large crocodilian relatives, early mammal-like reptiles, and others. They emerged from that catastrophe not just as survivors, but as inheritors. The Jurassic world is theirs to shape, and shape it they do. The sauropods, those long-necked, long-tailed, pillar-legged herbivores, become the largest land animals that have ever existed. We're talking about animals like Brachiosaurus, Diplodocus, Apatosaurus, and later, in the late Jurassic, the truly staggering Supersaurus and Argentinosaurus. These aren't just big animals, they're mobile architecture. A large Brachiosaurus stands as tall as a 4-story building and weighs as much as 12 elephants. Its neck alone contains more bones than your entire spine and can reach vegetation 40 feet off the ground. But here's the question that should intrigue you. How? How does an animal that size even function? How does its heart pump blood up that absurdly long neck? How do its lungs exchange enough oxygen to power that immense body? How does it eat enough to fuel its metabolism without spending literally every waking moment chewing? The answers are elegant and strange. First, sauropods don't chew. Not really. They're equipped with simple, peg-like or spatulate teeth designed to strip vegetation, not process it. They swallow plant material more or less whole, and the real digestion happens in a massive fermentation chamber, essentially a living compost heap in their gut. Bacteria and other microorganisms break down the cellulose, generating nutrients, and, as a byproduct, enormous quantities of gas. A sauropod's digestive system is less like a stomach and more like a bioreactor. Second, their respiratory system is unlike anything in modern mammals. Sauropods, like modern birds, possess a flow-through lung system. Air doesn't just go in and out of dead-end sacs like ours do. Instead, air flows in one direction through the lungs, passing through a series of air sacs that extend throughout the body, even into the bones. This means that with every breath, fresh air is constantly moving across the respiratory surfaces. It's dramatically more efficient than our tidal breathing system. In a high-oxygen Jurassic atmosphere, this system allows sauropods to sustain metabolic rates that would be impossible otherwise. Third, those long necks aren't solid flesh and bone. They're marvels of weight reduction. The vertebrae are deeply hollowed out, pneumatized by extensions of the air sac system. If you could slice through a sauropod neck vertebra, you'd see something that looks almost like a honeycomb or the internal structure of a bird bone. Strength where it's needed, air where it's not. The result is a neck that's structurally sound but remarkably light for its size. And yet, even with all these adaptations, there's a puzzle. Recent biomechanical studies suggest that many sauropods probably didn't hold their necks in those dramatic, giraffe-like vertical poses we see in old museum displays. The cardiovascular strain would be enormous. Instead, they likely carried their heads at or slightly above shoulder height most of the time, sweeping their necks horizontally to browse across wide swaths of vegetation. Imagine a living excavator methodically stripping a forest bare without having to move its massive body more than necessary. These animals are eating machines, and they have to be. A large sauropod likely needs to consume somewhere between 400 and 800 pounds of plant material every single day. That's a third of a ton of leaves, fronds, and branches. Daily. For its entire life, which might span 60 or 70 years. Now think about what that means for the landscape. A herd of sauropods, and we have fossil evidence suggesting they traveled in groups, moves through a forest like a slow-motion hurricane. Trees are stripped, vegetation is trampled, entire ecosystems are reshaped. But here's the paradox. This destruction is also creation. By opening up the canopy, by trampling and manuring the ground, by dispersing seeds in their dung, sauropods act as ecosystem engineers. They create clearings where fast-growing plants colonize. They fertilize the soil. They maintain a mosaic of habitats that supports a greater diversity of life than a closed canopy forest ever could. In a very real sense, the Jurassic landscape is sculpted by sauropods. They're not just living in the environment. They are the environment. But they're not alone. Where there are massive herbivores, there are predators. And the Jurassic obliges with theropods, bipedal carnivorous dinosaurs that range from chicken-sized opportunists to apex predators that can take down prey far larger than themselves. The most famous Jurassic predator is probably Allosaurus. Picture a creature about 30 feet long, weighing perhaps 2 tons, built like a hatchet-made flesh. Its skull is long, narrow, and equipped with rows of recurved serrated teeth. Each tooth is designed not to crush or grind, but to slice. Bite down, pull back, let the wound do the work. Allosaurus doesn't have the bone-crushing bite force of later tyrannosaurs. It doesn't need it. It's a precision instrument, not a blunt weapon. Fossil evidence from sites like the Cleveland Lloyd Dinosaur Quarry in Utah reveals something fascinating. Allosaurus bones are often found in association with sauropod remains, and some of those sauropod bones bear tooth marks that match Allosaurus dentition perfectly. But here's the interesting part. Many of those marks show signs of healing. The sauropod survived the attack. This suggests that Allosaurus, rather than bringing down a full-grown sauropod in a single epic battle, likely engaged in a strategy we might call bite and wait. Inflict a wound. Let infection and blood loss weaken the prey. Follow at a distance. Wait. It's patient, it's methodical, and it's brutally effective. But Allosaurus isn't the only hunter in town. The Jurassic plays host to a remarkable diversity of theropods. There are ceratosaurs with elaborate head crests and horns. There are early members of the Coelurosaur lineage, small, fleet-footed predators with grasping hands and large brains relative to their body size. These are the animals that will, over the next 80 million years, give rise to tyrannosaurs, ornithomimosaurs, and eventually birds. And then there are the stegosaurs and early armored dinosaurs, creatures that look like evolution was experimenting with medieval armor long before humans thought of it. Stegosaurus, with its iconic double row of bony plates running down its back and its spiked tail, is one of the strangest animals ever to walk the earth. For decades, paleontologists debated the function of those plates. Defense? Display? Thermoregulation? The current consensus leans toward a combination. The plates are too thin and too poorly positioned to serve as effective armor against a predator like Allosaurus. But they're rich in blood vessels and arranged in an alternating pattern that would maximize surface area for heat exchange. In a warm Jurassic world, an animal the size of Stegosaurus, roughly the weight of a modern elephant, faces a real risk of overheating. Those plates act like radiators, shedding excess heat. And as a bonus, they make the animal look larger and more impressive from the side, which is useful whether you're trying to intimidate rivals or attract mates. The tail's spikes, on the other hand, those are purely weapons. We have Allosaurus fossils with puncture wounds that match Stegosaurus tail spikes precisely. That tail, swung with the full weight of a multi-ton body behind it, could drive a spike clean through flesh, bone, even into the body cavity. Stegosaurus might be a herbivore, but it's no one's easy meal. This is the ground-level Jurassic, a world of giants and hunters, of evolutionary innovation and ecological complexity. But this is only the beginning, because while dinosaurs dominate the headlines, the real revolution of the Jurassic is happening in places most people never think to look. In the trees, in the underbrush, in the margins and shadows. Small creatures, most no larger than a cat, many much smaller, are living their lives, raising their young, and quietly experimenting with strategies that will one day inherit the Earth. Mammals. Now, if you're picturing something cute and familiar, stop. Jurassic mammals are not your pets. They're not even particularly close relatives of modern mammal groups for the most part. They're strange, archaic, and diverse in ways that modern mammals aren't. Some are semi-aquatic, some are gliders, some have teeth that suggest they're eating insects, others that they're cracking seeds or even scavenging. And they're everywhere. Recent fossil discoveries have exploded the old myth that mammals spent the Mesozoic cowering in the shadows, waiting for the dinosaurs to go extinct. That's nonsense. Mesozoic mammals are successful, diverse, and ecologically important. But they're small. With a few bizarre exceptions, Jurassic mammals top out at around the size of a badger. Why? What's keeping them from getting larger? The answer, frustratingly, is probably competition. Dinosaurs occupy nearly every ecological niche that requires medium to large body size. Herbivore, dinosaurs. Carnivore, dinosaurs. Omnivore, dinosaurs. There's simply no room for a mammal to get big without going head-to-head with creatures that have 100-million-year head start on perfecting their game. So mammals do what successful organisms always do when they can't compete directly. They specialize. They go nocturnal, developing keen senses of hearing and smell that allow them to navigate in darkness. They develop complex teeth that can process food more efficiently. They refine their reproductive strategies. Most Jurassic mammals probably still lay eggs, like modern monotremes, but the seeds of placental and marsupial reproduction are already being sown. And here's the kicker. They're becoming warm-blooded. Full endothermy, the ability to generate and regulate body heat internally, is energetically expensive. It requires a lot of food to maintain, but it grants independence from the environment. A mammal doesn't need to bask in the sun to get moving in the morning. It can be active at night when temperatures drop. It can live in cooler regions. And in a world dominated by reptiles, even if those reptiles are more sophisticated than we often give them credit for, endothermy is a competitive edge. Now, here's where things get controversial. Were dinosaurs warm-blooded? The short answer is, some probably were. some probably weren't, and some were probably somewhere in between. But let's dig into this because it matters a lot. For most of the 20th century, dinosaurs were assumed to be cold-blooded in the way modern reptiles are, dependent on external heat sources, sluggish in cool weather, metabolically limited. This view started to crumble in the 1960s and 70s when paleontologists began looking more closely at dinosaur anatomy and behavior. Active predators like Allosaurus or Deinonychus show evidence of high activity levels. They have features like upright postures, long limbs, and complex social behaviors that are more consistent with endothermic animals. The discovery of feathered dinosaurs in China added fuel to the fire. Feathers are insulation. You don't need insulation unless you're generating your own heat. So where does the evidence stand now? Most paleontologists accept that many theropods, especially smaller, more derived ones, were probably endothermic or nearly so. Sauropods present a different puzzle. An animal that large generates enormous amounts of metabolic heat just by existing. They might not need active endothermy. They could maintain stable body temperatures through sheer mass, a strategy called gigantothermy. Stegosaurs, ankylosaurs, and the armored dinosaurs might fall somewhere in the middle, with metabolic rates higher than modern reptiles, but lower than modern mammals. The point is this: dinosaurs are not one thing. They're a spectacularly diverse group, and their physiologies are probably equally diverse. The Jurassic is a testing ground for metabolic strategies, and different lineages are finding different solutions. But while all this drama unfolds on land, something equally revolutionary is happening in the skies. Flight. Powered, flapping, controlled flight. It's one of the most difficult things evolution has ever accomplished, and it's evolved independently at least 4 times in vertebrate history. In insects first, then pterosaurs, then birds, and much later, bats. 2 of those 4 events happened during or shortly before the Jurassic. Let's talk about pterosaurs first, because they're the forgotten flyers of the Mesozoic. When most people think flying dinosaur, they're wrong on 2 counts. First, pterosaurs aren't dinosaurs. They're a separate lineage of archosaurs, cousins to dinosaurs, not members of the group. Second, calling them flying anything doesn't do them justice. Pterosaurs are the most successful flying vertebrates ever to exist. They dominate the skies for over 150 million years, diversifying into forms that range from sparrow-sized insectivores to nightmare-inducing giants with wingspans exceeding 30 feet. In the Jurassic, pterosaurs are everywhere. They soar over coastlines, snapping fish from the waves. They flit through forests, hunting insects. They nest on cliffs and in trees. Their wings aren't made of feathers. They're made of skin, muscle, and fiber, stretched between an enormously elongated 4th finger and the body. It's a completely different structural solution to flight than what birds would evolve. And it works beautifully. Recent studies of pterosaur fossils have revealed something astonishing. They're covered in pycnofibers, hair-like structures that serve as insulation. This is independent evidence of endothermy. Pterosaurs aren't gliding reptiles that occasionally flap their wings. They're active, warm-blooded flyers with metabolic rates comparable to modern birds. They have large brains, excellent vision, and sophisticated flight control. Some species develop elaborate head crests, probably for display, that are as bizarre and ornate as anything evolution has ever produced. But pterosaurs, for all their success, are about to face competition. Because in the late Jurassic, in the forests and coastal environments of what will become Europe and Asia, something new is taking to the air. Birds. The first bird, or rather, the first creature we recognize as distinctly bird-like, appears in the fossil record around 150 million years ago. Its name is Archaeopteryx, and it's a paleontological celebrity. When the first specimen was discovered in a limestone quarry in Bavaria in 1861, just 2 years after Darwin published On the Origin of Species, it caused a sensation. Here was a creature with feathers and wings like a bird, but teeth and a long bony tail like a reptile. It was a transitional form, a missing link, exactly the sort of thing Darwin's theory predicted should exist. Archaeopteryx is small, about the size of a raven, and it's beautifully preserved in fine-grained limestone that captures every detail of its plumage. It has asymmetrical flight feathers, the hallmark of powered flight. But it also has claws on its wings, a toothed beak, and a skeleton that's unmistakably theropod. It's a dinosaur, a small, feathered, flying dinosaur. And this is where the story gets really interesting. Because Archaeopteryx isn't an isolated oddity, it's part of a continuum. Over the past 30 years, fossil discoveries in China have revealed dozens of feathered dinosaur species, ranging from turkey-sized oviraptorosaurs to tiny sparrow-like creatures. Feathers, it turns out, didn't evolve for flight. They evolved for insulation, for display, possibly for brooding eggs. Flight came later, co-opting structures that already existed for other purposes. This is evolution at its most elegant. Not designing from scratch, but tinkering, repurposing, finding new uses for old tools. And in the process, a lineage of small theropod dinosaurs transforms into the most diverse group of vertebrates alive today. There are more species of birds on Earth right now than all mammals, reptiles, and amphibians combined. And it all starts here, in the Jurassic, with creatures like Archaeopteryx experimenting with a new way to move through the world. So now we have our cast: sauropods reshaping forests, theropods hunting and scavenging, armored dinosaurs browsing on low vegetation, mammals hiding in the underbrush, refining strategies that will pay off millions of years hence, pterosaurs ruling the skies, and the first birds tentatively taking wing. But the Jurassic isn't just about who's living. It's about where they're living. And that geography is shifting in ways that will shape life for the rest of the Mesozoic and beyond. Remember, Pangaea is breaking apart. The Atlantic Ocean is beginning to open. Africa and South America, still connected at the southern end, are pulling away from North America and Europe. India is drifting northward, a rogue continent on a collision course with Asia. A collision that won't happen for another 100 million years, but will eventually create the Himalayas. The Tethys Sea, a vast tropical ocean, separates the northern and southern landmasses. This breakup has profound consequences. As continents separate, they create new coastlines. Coastlines mean shallow seas, and shallow seas are nurseries of biodiversity. Coral reefs expand. Marine invertebrates diversify. And those marine reptiles, ichthyosaurs, plesiosaurs, marine crocodiles, thrive in these productive coastal waters. But the rifting also creates barriers. Populations that were once continuous become isolated. And isolation, in evolutionary terms, is an opportunity. Isolated populations diverge. They adapt to local conditions. Over millions of years, they become distinct species. The breakup of Pangaea is, in effect, creating a planet with more ecological theatres, more stages on which evolution can experiment. This is why the Jurassic sees such an explosion of diversity. It's not just that the climate is favourable, though it is. It's that the planet is fragmenting into a mosaic of environments, each with its own challenges and opportunities. And life, resourceful and relentless, pours into every available niche. By the end of the early Jurassic, roughly 174 million years ago, the world is unrecognizable compared to the Triassic. The late Jurassic, which stretches from about 163 to 145 million years ago, will see even more dramatic changes. This is when the Morrison Formation in North America is laid down, one of the richest dinosaur fossil deposits ever found. This is when the forests of Tendaguru in Tanzania accumulate the bones of sauropods so enormous that it took decades to fully excavate them. This is when the Solnhofen limestone in Germany preserves Archaeopteryx in exquisite, almost miraculous detail. The late Jurassic is peak dinosaur, but it's also the setup for what comes next. Because the world, even in its Jurassic warmth and stability, is never truly static. Sea levels rise and fall, volcanic activity waxes and wanes, and in the oceans, something is stirring that will become critically important in the next period, the Cretaceous. Flowering plants, angiosperms. They haven't arrived yet, not quite, but their ancestors are out there, waiting in the wings. And when they do arrive, they will change everything. They'll create new food sources. They'll drive the evolution of new insect pollinators. They'll reshape ecosystems from the ground up. But that's a story for later. For now, we're still in the Jurassic. And if you've been paying attention, you've probably noticed something. We've talked about dinosaurs and pterosaurs and mammals and birds, and the breakup of Pangaea, and the warmth of the climate and the chemistry of the atmosphere. But we haven't talked about the ocean itself. Not really. Not in the depth it deserves. And that's what we're going to do next. Because the Jurassic Ocean is where some of the strangest, most alien, and most utterly terrifying creatures in Earth's history make their home. The ocean has always been Earth's true wilderness. Even today, with satellites mapping every square mile of the surface and submersibles probing the deepest trenches, we've explored less than 5% of the deep sea. We know more about the surface of Mars than we do about our own abyssal plains. Now imagine trying to understand an ocean that existed 170 million years ago. An ocean warmer, deeper, more chemically different than anything we have today. An ocean with no ice caps to constrain it, no familiar currents to map it, and creatures in it so bizarre that they seem designed by a committee of science fiction writers with no budget constraints. Welcome to the Jurassic Seas. Leave your assumptions at the shore. Let's start with something fundamental: water temperature. Today's oceans have a sharp thermal gradient. Tropical surface waters can reach the mid-80s Fahrenheit, while the deep ocean hovers just above freezing, around 35 to 40 degrees. This temperature difference drives circulation. Cold, dense polar water sinks and flows toward the equator along the bottom, while warm surface water flows poleward to replace it. It's called thermohaline circulation, and it's the engine that distributes heat and nutrients throughout the ocean. In the Jurassic, this engine runs differently. With no polar ice, there's no source of extremely cold, dense water. The temperature gradient between equator and poles is much gentler, maybe 15 to 20 degrees instead of 50. The deep ocean is warm, not bathtub warm, but perhaps 55 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit at depth. That might not sound dramatic, but it changes everything. Warm water holds less dissolved oxygen than cold water. This is simple chemistry. And if deep water is warm, and if circulation is sluggish because there's no dense polar water sinking to drive it, then the deep ocean can become oxygen poor. Not everywhere, not all the time, but in certain basins, certain configurations, you get what oceanographers call anoxic or disoxic conditions, water with very little or no oxygen at all. We have evidence for this. Black shales, sedimentary rocks rich in organic matter that accumulated in oxygen-poor environments, are common in Jurassic marine deposits. These aren't just interesting geological footnotes. They tell us that parts of the Jurassic Ocean were biological deserts at depth, while the surface teemed with life. It's a stratified ocean, with productivity concentrated in the upper layers where sunlight and oxygen are abundant, and a dark, largely lifeless zone below. But don't mistake oxygen poor at depth for lifeless overall. The Jurassic Ocean is astonishingly productive in its upper layers. Phytoplankton, microscopic photosynthetic organisms, bloom in enormous quantities, fueled by high carbon dioxide levels and warm temperatures. These phytoplankton support zooplankton, which supports small fish, which support larger fish, which support the apex predators. And those apex predators are nothing short of spectacular. Let's talk about ichthyosaurs. If you traveled back to the Jurassic and stood on a coastline, let's say the coast of what will become England, where some of the best ichthyosaur fossils have been found, you might, if you were lucky and patient, see something surface in the distance. A sleek, dark shape, moving fast, a spray of mist as it exhales. Then it's gone, diving back into the blue-green water with barely a ripple. Ichthyosaurs are marine reptiles, but they look, move, and behave like dolphins. This is convergent evolution at its finest. Here's a lineage of terrestrial reptiles that went back into the oceans sometime in the early Mesozoic, and over millions of years reshaped themselves into something hydrodynamically perfect. They have streamlined, torpedo-shaped bodies. They have flippers instead of legs. Though, if you look at the bones inside those flippers, you can still see the ghosts of fingers and wrists and elbows, a reminder that their ancestors once walked on land. They have a tall, crescent-shaped tail fin that provides propulsion. And they have huge eyes, some of the largest eyes relative to body size of any vertebrate ever, designed to gather light in the dim depths where they hunt. Because ichthyosaurs are deep divers. We know this from several lines of evidence. First, those enormous eyes. You don't need eyes the size of dinner plates unless you're operating in low-light conditions. Second, we've found ichthyosaur fossils with stomach contents that include deep-sea squid, creatures that never come near the surface. Third, studies of ichthyosaur bone microstructure show evidence of decompression damage, the kind of thing that happens when an animal dives deep and surfaces too quickly. Ichthyosaurs are pursuing prey hundreds of feet down, holding their breath for extended periods, then rocketing back to the surface. And they're giving birth to live young. We have fossils, tragic, beautiful fossils, of ichthyosaurs caught in the act of birth. Some show the infant emerging tail first, exactly the way dolphins and whales give birth today. This is a fully marine lifestyle. Ichthyosaurs never need to come ashore. They're born at sea, they live at sea, and they die at sea. Now, the largest Jurassic ichthyosaurs reach lengths of around 20 to 25 feet. Impressive, but not monstrous by ocean standards. However, recent discoveries have hinted at something much larger. Isolated bones, vertebrae, and skull fragments suggest ichthyosaurs exceeding 60 feet in length. If that's accurate, and it's still debated, then these would rival modern whales in size. Imagine a creature the length of a city bus, built like a missile, powered by muscles designed for burst speed, hunting in an ocean that has no whales, no seals, no dolphins. Ichthyosaurs are it. They're the ocean's mammal analogues, and they're doing just fine. But they're not alone at the top of the food chain. Plesiosaurs represent a completely different approach to marine predation. If ichthyosaurs are the cheetahs of the Jurassic Ocean, plesiosaurs are the ambush specialists. They come in two basic body plans, and both are deeply strange. First, you have the long-necked plesiosaurs, creatures like Plesiosaurus and Cryptoclydus. Picture a body roughly the size and shape of a large seal, with 4 flippers, a short tail, and a neck that makes up nearly half the animal's total length. Some species have necks with 70 or more vertebrae. 70. Your neck has 7. This isn't just a long neck, it's an improbable engineering project. And for a long time, paleontologists struggled to understand how it could function. The old image of a plesiosaur as a slow, graceful creature drifting through the water like a living periscope has been thoroughly debunked. That neck is too flexible, too poorly reinforced to be held stiffly upright. Instead, recent biomechanical models suggest that long-necked plesiosaurs use their necks like living fishing rods. They swim slowly through schools of fish, their necks trailing behind or to the side, then whip the neck forward in a rapid strike, snapping up prey before it can react. It's a strategy that requires precision, not speed. And it works in environments where prey is abundant but wary. Shallow seas, coastal areas, places where a more conventional predator would struggle to maneuver. Then you have the pliosaurs, the short-necked plesiosaurs, and these are a different beast entirely. Pliosaurs are built for power. They have massive skulls, short necks, enormous flippers, and bodies that can exceed 40 feet in length. The largest known pliosaurs, creatures like Leopleurodon and, later in the Jurassic, Pliosaurus, have skulls that approach 10 feet long. That's a skull the size of a small car, and it's packed with teeth designed to grip, crush, and tear. These animals are the apex predators of the Jurassic Ocean. They hunt everything: large fish, sharks, other marine reptiles, even other plesiosaurs. We have bite marks on ichthyosaur skeletons that match pliosaur dentition. We have fossilized pliosaur stomach contents that include the remains of plesiosaurs. This is an arms race in real time. Hunters evolving to be faster and more powerful, prey evolving to be more elusive and better defended, and the ocean itself acting as both battleground and crucible. But here's the truly fascinating part. Plesiosaurs and ichthyosaurs aren't fish. They're air-breathing reptiles. Which means every one of them, no matter how deep they dive or how far from shore they roam, has to surface regularly to breathe. This creates vulnerability. A pliosaur waiting near the surface can ambush an ichthyosaur as it comes up for air. An ichthyosaur, fast and maneuverable, can potentially escape a pliosaur by diving deep and staying down until the pliosaur has to surface. It's a game of three-dimensional chess played out across thousands of miles of open ocean. And then there are the sharks. Sharks are older than trees. They've been around in one form or another for over 400 million years. By the Jurassic, they're already a mature, diverse lineage. But Jurassic sharks don't look quite like modern sharks. Many of them have bizarre fin spines, elaborate head ornamentation, or unusual tooth arrangements. One group, the hybodonts, dominates freshwater and coastal environments. They're medium-sized, generalist predators. Think of them as the coyotes of the Jurassic shark world. They eat fish, crustaceans, mollusks, whatever they can catch. But out in the open ocean, you start to see the ancestors of modern shark groups. Early relatives of modern mackerel sharks, the lineage that will eventually produce great whites, makos, and megalodons, are already present. They're sleek, fast, and efficient. And they're competing with ichthyosaurs and marine crocodiles for the same prey. Marine crocodiles. Yes. Because why should reptiles only dominate the land? In the Jurassic, several lineages of crocodilians return to the sea, and some of them become formidable predators. The metriorhynchids, for example, lose their armored scales, too much drag in the water, and develop flippers and a tail fin. They look improbably like toothy dolphins. They hunt fish and squid in coastal and open ocean environments, and some of them grow large enough to take on marine reptiles as prey. The Jurassic Ocean is a crowded place. It's not a world where a single apex predator dominates unchallenged. It's a mosaic of niches, with different predators specializing in different prey, different depths, different strategies. And woven through all of this are the invertebrates, the ammonites, the belemnites, the crustaceans, the bivalves, that form the foundation of the food web. Let's spend a moment on ammonites, because they're one of the signature creatures of the Mesozoic seas, and they're absolutely everywhere in Jurassic marine deposits. Ammonites are cephalopods, relatives of modern squid, octopuses, and nautiluses. They live inside coiled shells, often beautifully ornamented with ribs, spines, and ridges. These shells are divided into chambers. The animal lives in the outermost chamber, and the inner chambers are filled with gas, providing buoyancy. By adjusting the gas-to-liquid ratio in these chambers, an ammonite can control its depth in the water column. It's an elegant solution, and it allows ammonites to occupy a wide range of marine environments. Jurassic ammonites range in size from less than an inch to over 6 feet in diameter. They're herbivores, carnivores, scavengers, ecologically diverse in ways that modern cephalopods aren't. And they're evolving rapidly. Ammonite species often last only a few 100,000 years before going extinct or evolving into something new. This makes them incredibly useful for dating rocks. If you find a particular ammonite species in a rock layer, you can pinpoint that layer's age to within a fairly narrow window. Ammonites are the clocks of deep time. But their rapid evolution also tells us something important. The Jurassic Ocean is dynamic. Sea levels rise and fall. Ocean currents shift. Temperatures fluctuate. And ammonites, with their short generation times and wide dispersal, respond to these changes quickly. They're the canaries in the coal mine, sensitive indicators of environmental shifts that might not leave other obvious traces. And the ocean is shifting. Even within the Jurassic, which we tend to think of as a stable greenhouse world, there are variations. There are cooler pulses, warmer pulses, times when sea levels drop and coastlines retreat, times when they rise and flood continental interiors. These fluctuations are driven by tectonics, the ongoing breakup of Pangaea, and by orbital variations, the subtle wobbles in Earth's rotation and orbit that change how sunlight is distributed across the planet. These Milankovitch cycles, as they're called, operate on timescales of tens to hundreds of thousands of years. They're too slow to notice in a human lifetime, but over geological time, they leave clear signatures in the rock record. Layers of limestone alternating with shale, rhythmic patterns in sediment composition, changes in fossil assemblages. These are the fingerprints of orbital forcing, the planet's slow dance with the sun written in stone. And here's where things get deeply interesting. Because if you look closely at the sedimentary record of the Jurassic, you start to see patterns that suggest the climate isn't just warm and stable. It's warm and stable with pulses. Brief intervals, geologically speaking, where things cool down slightly, where ocean circulation strengthens, where oxygen penetrates deeper into the water column. And then things warm up again. These pulses matter because they drive extinction and diversification. During the cooler, more oxygenated intervals, deep water species expand their ranges. Shallow water species that depend on warm temperatures retreat toward the equator. When warming returns, the pattern reverses. Over millions of years, this creates a pump, a mechanism that generates biodiversity by constantly shuffling species ranges, creating opportunities for isolation, speciation, and evolutionary experimentation. The Jurassic Ocean, in other words, isn't just a backdrop. It's an active participant in the story of life. It's creating conditions, setting challenges, rewarding certain strategies and punishing others. And the creatures that thrive in it are the ones that can adapt, that can find niches, that can exploit opportunities faster than their competitors. Now, we need to talk about something that most people overlook when they think about ancient oceans: sound. The ocean is not silent. Today's oceans are full of noise. The songs of whales, the clicks of dolphins, the grunts of fish, the snapping of shrimp. Sound travels far and fast in water, much faster than in air. Marine animals use sound to communicate, to navigate, to hunt. There's no reason to think the Jurassic Ocean was any different. Ichthyosaurs, being air breathers with complex social behaviors, probably vocalized. Maybe not in the elaborate songs of humpback whales, but certainly in calls, clicks, and whistles used to coordinate group behavior or attract mates. Plesiosaurs, with their long necks and specialized hunting strategies, might have used vibrations or low-frequency sounds to detect prey. Marine crocodiles, like their modern relatives, probably hissed, growled, and bellowed during mating season. And beneath all of that, there's the soundscape of the invertebrates. Ammonites jet-propelling themselves through the water. Belemnites, squid-like cephalopods with internal shells, hunting in schools, their movements creating pressure waves. Crustaceans clicking and scraping on the seafloor. The Jurassic Ocean is alive with sound, a symphony in frequencies and rhythms we can only imagine. But let's come back to the surface. Because there's one more group of animals we need to discuss before we leave the ocean behind, and they exist in that liminal space between sea and air. Coastal pterosaurs. Pterosaurs, as we've discussed, dominate Jurassic skies. But many species specialize in coastal and marine environments. They're fish eaters, and they've evolved an astonishing array of strategies for catching their prey. Some species are skim feeders. They fly low over the water, dragging their elongated lower jaws through the surface to scoop up fish. It's a strategy seen in modern birds like skimmers, but pterosaurs do it at much larger sizes. Imagine a creature with a 10-foot wingspan, gliding inches above the waves, its jaws slicing through the water at 20 miles per hour. It requires extraordinary flight control and a jaw strong enough to handle the drag forces. Pterosaurs manage both. Other species are plunge divers. They spot fish from the air, fold their wings, and dive, sometimes from heights of 50 feet or more, hitting the water with enough force to stun prey. Then they surface, snatch the fish, and take off again. This is the strategy used by modern gannets and pelicans, but again, pterosaurs are doing it at scales and efficiencies that make modern birds look like amateurs. And then there are the waders, smaller pterosaurs that stalk through shallow water on their hind legs and wings, using their beaks to probe mud for invertebrates. These are the shorebirds of the Jurassic, and they're everywhere you find a coastline. The point is this: the boundary between ocean and sky in the Jurassic is not a hard line. It's permeable. Pterosaurs exploit marine resources. Marine reptiles surface into the aerial world to breathe. And the ecosystems that form at these boundaries, estuaries, lagoons, coastal reefs, are some of the most productive and diverse on the planet. Which brings us to one of the most important and least appreciated aspects of the Jurassic: its reefs. When most people think of ancient reefs, they think of coral. And yes, there are corals in the Jurassic. But the dominant reef builders of this period are not corals. They're bivalves. Specifically, a group called rudists and another group called oysters, though these are not the oysters you eat with lemon and hot sauce. These are massive, heavily calcified creatures that cement themselves to hard substrates and grow in dense thickets. But even more important, particularly in the early and middle Jurassic, are sponges. Not the soft, squishy sponges you might picture. These are glass sponges, hexactinellids, with skeletons made of silica. They grow into massive reef-like structures in the warm, clear, shallow seas that flood continental margins. And these reefs become biodiversity hotspots, providing habitat for fish, crustaceans, mollusks, echinoderms, whole ecosystems built on a foundation of silica and calcite. Why does this matter? Because reefs are nurseries. They're where juvenile fish find shelter, where invertebrates reproduce, where nutrients cycle through complex food webs. Reefs support fisheries, and those fisheries support larger predators, the marine reptiles, the sharks, the early marine crocodiles. The health of the Jurassic Ocean, in many ways, depends on the health of its reefs, and those reefs, in turn, depend on stable, warm, clear water conditions, which makes the Jurassic Ocean vulnerable in ways that might not be immediately obvious. Because while the climate is generally stable, it's not invulnerable. And there are moments, brief, violent moments, when the system is shocked. Around 183 million years ago, during the early Jurassic, something happens. We call it the Toarcian Oceanic Anoxic event, and it's a glimpse of what happens when the ocean system goes haywire. Massive volcanic eruptions, part of the breakup of Pangaea, inject enormous quantities of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Global temperatures spike. The ocean warms rapidly. And remember what warm water does. It holds less oxygen. Deep water circulation slows. Oxygen levels in the ocean crash. Anoxia spreads from the deep sea into shallower waters. Marine life suffocates. Reefs collapse. Ammonites, normally so diverse, go through a severe bottleneck. Marine reptiles suffer. It's not a mass extinction on the scale of the end Permian or end Cretaceous, but it's significant. Perhaps 20 to 30% of marine species disappear. And then, over the course of a few 100,000 years, the system stabilizes. Volcanic activity wanes. Carbon dioxide levels drop. The ocean cools slightly, oxygenates, and life rebounds. New ammonite lineages radiate out to fill empty niches. Marine reptiles diversify. Reefs rebuild. The Toarcian event is a warning shot. It demonstrates that even a greenhouse world, even a stable, productive ocean, has limits. Push it too hard, too fast, and the system can flip into a state that's hostile to life. And then you wait. Wait for the planet to equilibrate. Wait for geological processes to remove the excess carbon. Wait for evolution to repair the damage. This is a pattern we'll see again in Earth's history. Stability punctuated by crisis. Long periods of gradual change interrupted by rapid, catastrophic shifts. The Jurassic is not immune to this. It's just that for most of its duration, the crises are relatively mild and recovery is relatively fast. But all of this, the diversity, the productivity, the evolutionary experimentation, is building towards something. The Jurassic is not an end point. It's a middle chapter. The stage is being set for the Cretaceous, the final and longest period of the Mesozoic, when life will reach peaks of diversity and strangeness that eclipse even what we see in the Jurassic. But before we get there, we need to talk about one more thing. One more piece of the Jurassic puzzle that ties everything together. Plants. We've talked about dinosaurs and marine reptiles and pterosaurs and mammals and reefs and ocean chemistry. But none of it works without plants. Plants are the base of the food web. They capture solar energy and turn it into sugars. They produce oxygen. They shape landscapes. They are, in a very real sense, the foundation upon which everything else is built. And Jurassic plants are weird. Forget flowering plants. They don't exist yet. Forget grasses. They won't appear for another 100 million years. The Jurassic landscape is dominated by conifers, cycads, ginkgos, and ferns. It's a green world, but it's a green world that would look alien to modern eyes. Conifers, relatives of modern pines, spruces, and redwoods, are the tall trees of the Jurassic. They form forests that stretch across continents. Some species grow to enormous sizes, rivaling modern woods. Their wood is dense, resinous, and resistant to decay. When these trees die and fall into swamps or rivers, they can become buried in sediment and, over millions of years, fossilize. The result is petrified forests, stone trees that preserve every detail of the original wood structure. We find these all over the world, monuments to forests that thrived and died long before humans existed. Cycads look superficially like palms, stout trunks topped with crowns of tough, pinnate leaves. But they're not closely related to palms at all. They're gymnosperms, producing seeds in cones rather than flowers. Jurassic cycads are incredibly diverse, occupying niches from arid uplands to wet floodplains. And they're a favorite food of many herbivorous dinosaurs. Those tough, fibrous leaves are packed with nutrients, and while they're difficult to digest, animals with the right gut bacteria, like sauropods, can extract tremendous energy from them. Ginkgos, represented today by a single living species, Ginkgo biloba, are far more diverse in the Jurassic. They're deciduous trees, losing their fan-shaped leaves in seasonal climates. though seasonal in the Jurassic is a relative term. There's no winter in the modern sense, but there are wetter and drier periods, and ginkgos respond to these by shedding leaves during dry times. And then there are ferns. Ferns are everywhere. They carpet the forest floor. They grow as understory plants. Some species grow as tall as trees. Tree ferns, which still exist in tropical regions today, though they're much less common. Ferns reproduce via spores, not seeds, which means they need moist conditions for reproduction. The warm, humid Jurassic is perfect for them. But here's the key thing about Jurassic plants. They're all relatively slow-growing and nutrient-poor compared to flowering plants. Conifer needles, cycad leaves, fern fronds, they're tough, fibrous, and loaded with compounds that make them difficult to digest. This is why herbivorous dinosaurs need such elaborate digestive systems. They're processing low-quality food in massive quantities. And this has knock-on effects throughout the ecosystem. Because if plants are the base of the food web, and if those plants are relatively low in nutritional value, then herbivores need to eat a lot. Which means they need to be big. Large bodies allow for long digestive tracts and fermentation chambers. Which means they're ecosystem engineers, reshaping landscapes through their feeding. Which creates opportunities for other species. Which drives diversification. It's all connected. The chemistry of Jurassic plants influences the evolution of Jurassic herbivores, which influences the evolution of Jurassic predators, which influences the structure of Jurassic ecosystems. Change one piece and everything else shifts. And change is coming. Not yet, not in the Jurassic, but soon. Because in the early Cretaceous, flowering plants will appear. And when they do, they'll transform the planet more profoundly than any single group of organisms since the evolution of photosynthesis itself. But that's later. Right now, we're still in the Jurassic. And we need to talk about what all of this, the climate, the geography, the oceans, the life, means. What's the big picture? What's the thread that ties it all together? Here's my answer. The Jurassic is a planet in balance. Not a static balance. Nature doesn't do static, but a dynamic equilibrium. Energy flows in from the sun. Carbon cycles through the atmosphere, the oceans, the biosphere, and the rocks. Continents drift. Species evolve, compete, go extinct, and are replaced. And through it all, the system maintains itself. It's resilient. It absorbs shocks, volcanic eruptions, sea level changes, climatic shifts, and recovers. This resilience comes from diversity. A diverse ecosystem has redundancy. If one species goes extinct, another can fill its niche. If one food source disappears, animals can switch to another. Diversity is not just a nice feature, it's insurance against catastrophe. And the Jurassic is spectacularly diverse. More so than the Triassic that preceded it. More so in some ways than the Cretaceous that will follow. This is a golden age. Not because life is easy, life is never easy, but because the conditions are right for experimentation, for innovation, for the kind of evolutionary creativity that produces sauropods and pterosaurs and ichthyosaurs and the first birds. But golden ages don't last forever. Systems in balance can be pushed out of balance. And while the Jurassic is stable, it's not eternal. So what ends it? What tips the Jurassic into the Cretaceous? The answer is complicated, and it doesn't involve a single catastrophic event like the asteroid that will eventually kill the non-avian dinosaurs. Instead, it's a gradual transition. Sea levels change, climates shift slightly, species turnover accelerates, and at some point, around 145 million years ago, paleontologists look at the fossil record and say, okay, the Jurassic is over. We're in the Cretaceous now. It's arbitrary, in a sense. Nature doesn't care about our boundaries. But it's also real, because the Cretaceous world is different from the Jurassic world in tangible ways. Different dominant species, different ecosystems, different rules. But before we cross that boundary, we need to step back and ask ourselves a bigger question. A question that cuts to the heart of why we're spending an hour talking about a time period that ended 145 million years ago. Why does the Jurassic matter? Not just to paleontologists or geology nerds or dinosaur enthusiasts, but to anyone trying to understand how our world works. Here's why. The Jurassic is a case study in planetary function. It shows us what Earth looks like in a greenhouse state. Warm poles, no ice, high sea levels, high atmospheric CO2. And crucially, it shows us that this state can persist stably for tens of millions of years. Life doesn't just survive in a greenhouse world. It thrives. But, and this is a big but, the life that thrives is different from the life we know. The ecosystems are structured differently. The dominant players are different. The rules are different. And the transitions between climate states, like the Toarcian event, can be brutal. We're living in a time when our own planet is warming rapidly. And while I'm not going to turn this into a climate lecture, I will say this. The Jurassic teaches us that climate change is not necessarily an existential threat to life as a whole. Earth has been warmer before. Life has adapted before. But it also teaches us that the specific configuration of life we have now, the ecosystems, the species, the patterns we've built our civilizations around, is tied to a particular climate state. Change that state fast enough, and what you get isn't necessarily extinction. What you get is reorganization. And reorganization for complex societies dependent on stable agriculture and predictable weather is catastrophic in its own right. The Jurassic is not a blueprint for our future, but it's a reminder that Earth has many possible states, and we're currently living in just one of them. Understanding how past states functioned, how they transitioned, and what those transitions meant for life is not just academic curiosity, it's survival knowledge. So with that in mind, let's turn our attention to one of the most fascinating and controversial aspects of Jurassic life: behavior. Because it's one thing to reconstruct skeletons and describe species. It's another thing entirely to understand how these animals actually lived, how they hunted, how they raised their young, how they interacted with each other and their environments. And this is where paleontology becomes detective work, because behavior doesn't fossilize, at least not directly. But behavior leaves traces, footprints, bite marks, nesting sites, bone beds where dozens or hundreds of individuals died together, coprolites, fossilized feces that tell us what an animal ate and how its digestive system processed food, pathologies, injuries, diseases, healed fractures that reveal the hazards these animals faced and how resilient they were. These traces are fragmentary, ambiguous, maddeningly incomplete. But if you know how to read them, they tell stories. Let's start with trackways, fossilized footprints. The Jurassic has given us thousands of dinosaur trackways, preserved in ancient mudflats, riverbanks, and shorelines that were buried and lithified before erosion could destroy them. And these trackways are revealing in ways that bones alone never could be. Take sauropod tracks. When you find a sauropod trackway, you're not just seeing where an animal walked, you're seeing how it walked. The spacing between footprints tells you stride length. The depth and shape of the prints tell you about weight distribution. The angle of the feet tells you about posture and gait. And what we've learned from these trackways has overturned decades of assumptions. For years, people assumed sauropods were slow, lumbering animals, barely able to support their own weight. Some scientists even suggested they spent most of their time in water, using buoyancy to take the load off their legs. The trackways demolished that idea. Sauropod footprints are found in terrestrial environments, floodplains, lake margins, semi-arid settings with no evidence of deep water. The tracks show a walking gait that's efficient and purposeful. And in some cases, we find trackways of multiple individuals moving in the same direction, spaced closely together. This is evidence of herding behavior. Now, herding in animals this large has profound implications. Herding requires communication. It requires social structure, leaders and followers, probably family groups with adults protecting juveniles. It requires coordination, and it suggests that sauropods were not the dim-witted, solitary plodders of old museum dioramas. They were social animals with complex behaviors. But the most revealing trackways are the ones that show predator-prey interactions. There are sites in the Morrison Formation where you can see theropod tracks, three-toed, clawed prints following sauropod tracks. The spacing suggests the theropod was moving at a trot or a slow run, tracking the sauropod. Did it catch it? We don't know. The trackway ends where erosion destroyed the next layer. But the fact that we can see this interaction frozen in stone, something that happened one afternoon 150 million years ago, is extraordinary. Then there are the nesting sites. These are rarer than trackways, but when we find them, they're gold mines of behavioral information. One of the most famous Jurassic nesting sites is in Argentina, where paleontologists have found clutches of sauropod eggs arranged in what appear to be colonial nesting grounds. The eggs are laid in shallow pits, covered with vegetation, a strategy that uses the heat from decomposing plant matter to incubate the eggs, much like modern megapode birds do. The nesting sites show evidence of being used repeatedly over many years, suggesting that sauropods returned to the same locations to breed, possibly seasonally. The eggs themselves are fascinating. Sauropod eggs are surprisingly small, about the size of a grapefruit or a cantaloupe, given the size of the adults. This means the hatchlings are tiny, probably less than 2 feet long. They're vulnerable, and this raises a question. Did the adults care for their young, or were the hatchlings left to fend for themselves? The evidence is mixed. We don't have clear examples of adult sauropods guarding nests the way modern crocodiles do. But we do have bone beds containing juveniles of different ages mixed with adults, which suggests some level of extended parental care, or at least group cohesion that allowed juveniles to survive alongside adults. It's possible that sauropod parenting was more subtle, maintaining a presence in the area, deterring predators by sheer size rather than direct nest guarding. Theropods, on the other hand, give us clearer evidence of parental care. In China, paleontologists have found oviraptorosaur fossils, admittedly from the Cretaceous, but the behavior probably extends back into the Jurassic among related groups. preserved in brooding positions over nests of eggs. The adult is sitting on the nest, wings spread, exactly like a modern bird. This is direct evidence of incubation behavior, and it's consistent with the broader picture emerging from theropod fossils. These animals are not cold-blooded reptiles. They're active, warm-blooded, behaviorally complex animals that care for their young. Which brings us to one of the most contentious and fascinating questions in all of paleontology. Were dinosaurs warm-blooded? We touched on this earlier, but let's dig deeper, because the answer shapes everything about how we understand Jurassic ecosystems. The traditional view, inherited from the 19th and early 20th centuries, was that dinosaurs were reptiles, and reptiles are ectothermic. They rely on external heat sources to regulate body temperature. This view held that dinosaurs were slow, sluggish in cool weather, and limited in their activity levels. It fit with the image of dinosaurs as evolutionary failures, animals that were too specialized, too poorly adapted, destined to go extinct. But as paleontologists in the late 20th century began examining dinosaur anatomy more carefully, problems with this view emerged. Dinosaurs have upright postures, with legs held directly beneath the body rather than sprawled out to the sides. This is a feature associated with sustained, high-speed locomotion, something ectothermic animals struggle with. Dinosaur bone microstructure shows evidence of rapid growth rates, far faster than modern reptiles and more consistent with mammals and birds. The presence of feathers in many theropod lineages, and possibly filamentous integument in other groups, suggests insulation, something only useful if you're generating internal heat. And then there's the ecological evidence. The ratio of predators to prey in a given ecosystem tells you about metabolic rates. Ectothermic predators, like crocodiles, have low metabolic rates and can survive on relatively little food. This means an ecosystem can support a lot of predators relative to prey. Endothermic predators, like wolves, have high metabolic rates and need a lot of food. This means you need many more prey animals per predator. When paleontologists calculate predator-prey ratios from Jurassic fossil assemblages, the numbers skew toward endothermy. So the current consensus, and it's a consensus, not universal agreement, is that many dinosaurs, particularly theropods and possibly sauropods, were mesothermic or fully endothermic. Mesothermy is a middle ground, an animal that maintains a stable body temperature but doesn't burn energy as fast as a mammal or bird. It's metabolically expensive enough to require regular feeding, but efficient enough to allow for large body size. This would fit perfectly with sauropods. They generate heat through their massive metabolic processes, they retain it through sheer bulk, and they don't lose it quickly because of low surface area to volume ratios. Theropods, especially smaller, more active ones, were probably fully endothermic. They have all the hallmarks: rapid growth, complex behaviors, insulation, high activity levels. By the late Jurassic, you have theropods like Allosaurus that are every bit as sophisticated as mammalian predators, and theropods like Archaeopteryx that are transitioning into birds. These are not cold-blooded animals. But here's where it gets interesting. Metabolic rate shapes everything about an ecosystem. It determines how much food an animal needs, which determines population densities, which determines ecological dynamics. A warm-blooded predator needs roughly 10 times more food than a cold-blooded one of the same size. This means that in a Jurassic ecosystem dominated by warm-blooded dinosaurs, you need vast amounts of plant productivity to support the herbivores, which in turn support the predators. And that's exactly what we see. The high CO2 Jurassic atmosphere drives plant growth. The abundant plants support enormous herbivore populations, and those herbivores support a diverse carnivore guild. It's all connected. The atmosphere influences the plants. The plants influence the herbivores. The herbivores influence the predators. And the metabolic strategies of the animals feed back into the ecosystem structure. The Jurassic works because every piece of the system is tuned to the others. Now let's talk about intelligence, because if we're reconstructing behavior, we need to understand cognition. How smart were these animals? Intelligence is hard to measure in living animals, let alone extinct ones. But we have proxies. Brain size relative to body size, the encephalization quotient, is one. Brain structure is another. And behavior inferred from trace fossils is a third. Sauropods have small brains relative to their enormous bodies. Their encephalization quotients are low, comparable to modern reptiles. Does this mean they're stupid? Not necessarily. Intelligence is task-specific. An animal doesn't need a large brain to be successful. It needs a brain adequate for its lifestyle. Sauropods are herbivores in a world with abundant food and relatively few threats once they reach adult size. They don't need to outthink their food. Plants don't run away. They don't need complex social manipulation. What they need is efficient sensory processing, coordination of a massive body, and enough social awareness to function in herds. And their brains are perfectly adequate for that. Theropods are a different story. Many theropods, particularly the smaller, more derived ones, have relatively large brains. Troodon, a late Cretaceous theropod, has one of the highest encephalization quotients of any dinosaur, comparable to modern birds. Even earlier theropods like the Jurassic compsognathids show evidence of enhanced visual processing and coordination, brain regions associated with hunting and manipulation. And then there's behavior. We have evidence of coordinated pack hunting in some theropod species. The famous Deinonychus bone bed from the early Cretaceous shows multiple individuals associated with a single large herbivore, suggesting cooperative hunting. If this behavior extends back into the Jurassic, and there's no reason to think it doesn't, then we're talking about animals capable of communication, strategy, and role differentiation within a group. That's sophisticated cognition. Pterosaurs too show evidence of high intelligence. Their brain-to-body ratios are comparable to modern birds. They have enlarged optic lobes, brain regions dedicated to processing visual information, which makes sense for flying animals that need to navigate three-dimensional space at speed. They have well-developed cerebellums, which coordinate movement. And they have behaviors, colonial nesting, long-distance flight, possibly tool use in some species, that suggest cognitive complexity. The point is this: the Jurassic is not populated by mindless automatons. These are animals with rich sensory worlds, complex behaviors, and cognitive abilities adequate to their ecological roles. They're successful not despite their brains, but because of them. Now, let's shift gears and talk about something that doesn't get enough attention: diseases and injuries. The fossil record preserves pathologies, abnormal bone growth, healed fractures, infections, cancers, arthritis. These are windows into the daily struggles of individual animals. And they tell us that life in the Jurassic, for all its abundance and diversity, is hard. We have sauropod vertebrae with fused bones, evidence of severe spinal injuries that healed but left the animal with chronic pain and reduced mobility. We have theropod skulls with bite marks from other theropods, some healed, some not. These are evidence of intraspecific combat, territorial disputes, fights over mates, dominance struggles. We have broken ribs, fractured limbs, infected wounds. And the fact that many of these injuries show signs of healing tells us something important. These animals are tough. They survive traumatic injuries that would kill most modern animals. But they also suffer. There's a famous Allosaurus specimen nicknamed Big Al that shows evidence of multiple pathologies. Broken ribs, infections, foot injuries that would have made walking agonizing. Big Al probably died young, weakened by cumulative injuries and unable to hunt effectively. It's a sobering reminder that natural selection is not kind. It doesn't care about individual suffering. It only cares about reproductive success. And in a world of giant predators and multi-ton herbivores, injury is common and survival is uncertain. There's also evidence of parasites. Coprolites, fossilized feces, sometimes contain traces of intestinal parasites. Bone lesions suggest infections by bacteria or fungi. Even dinosaurs, apex predators and titans of their ecosystems, are part of food webs that include microorganisms. They're colonized, infected, and occasionally killed by creatures too small to see. This is important because it humanizes these animals in a sense. They're not mythical monsters. They're living organisms dealing with the same fundamental problems all life faces: finding food, avoiding predators, healing from injuries, fighting off infections, reproducing. The scales are different, the anatomies are alien, but the struggles are universal. And speaking of reproduction, let's talk about sex. Because sex is one of the most powerful evolutionary forces, and yet it's almost invisible in the fossil record. We can infer sexual dimorphism, differences between males and females, from some dinosaur species. In some cases, we have individuals of the same species with different body sizes or different ornamentation. Ceratopsians, for example, often show variation in horn and frill size that might represent sexual differences. Some theropods have individuals with more robust or more gracile builds, possibly indicating males and females. But proving sexual dimorphism in fossils is notoriously difficult. You need large sample sizes. You need to rule out individual variation and ontogenetic changes, and you need to avoid circular reasoning. So while we suspect sexual dimorphism exists in many Jurassic dinosaurs, hard proof is elusive. What about courtship behavior? This is even more speculative, but we can make educated guesses based on modern analogues. Modern birds, descendants of theropod dinosaurs, engage in elaborate courtship displays involving vocalizations, dances, and visual displays. Crocodilians, close relatives of dinosaurs, bellow, thrash, and engage in complex aquatic displays. It's reasonable to assume that dinosaurs did something similar. Some species might have used their crests, horns, or frills in visual displays, shaking their heads, changing colors if they had chromatophores in their skin, or adopting specific postures. Sauropods, with their long necks, might have engaged in neck wrestling contests, like modern giraffes. Theropods might have vocalized, danced, or presented gifts, behaviors seen in modern birds of paradise and bowerbirds. And then there's the question of feathers. If theropods had feathers, and if those feathers were colorful or elaborately structured, then sexual selection might have driven much of their evolution. The peacock's tail is not an adaptation for survival. It's a liability, making the bird conspicuous to predators and awkward in flight. It exists because peahens prefer it. If female theropods preferred males with brighter colors or longer feathers, then sexual selection would drive the evolution of increasingly elaborate plumage. And this might explain some of the bizarre ornamentation we see in theropod fossils: crests, ridges, elaborate feather structures. This is speculative, yes, but it's speculation grounded in evolutionary theory and comparative biology. And it reminds us that evolution is not just about survival, it's about reproduction. And reproduction in sexually reproducing species involves choice, competition, and display. So here we are, more than halfway through our journey, and we've covered climate, geography, oceans, plants, herbivores, carnivores, flyers, marine reptiles, behavior, intelligence, disease, and sex. We've built a picture of the Jurassic as a dynamic, interconnected system, a planet-scale experiment in how life organizes itself under greenhouse conditions. But there's still a piece missing, a piece that ties everything together and explains why the Jurassic matters not just as history, but as a key to understanding our own world. Let's talk about carbon. Carbon is the element of life. Every organic molecule, proteins, fats, carbohydrates, DNA, is built on a backbone of carbon atoms. But carbon is also the element of climate. Carbon dioxide in the atmosphere traps heat. Carbon buried in rocks, as limestone, as organic matter, removes CO2 from the atmosphere and cools the climate. Carbon cycling through ecosystems, plants absorbing it, animals eating plants, decomposers breaking down dead material, regulates energy flow. The Jurassic carbon cycle is different from today's, and understanding how it works is critical to understanding the period. Start with volcanic outgassing. The breakup of Pangaea is driven by mantle plumes, upwellings of hot rock from deep in the earth. Where these plumes reach the surface, they create massive volcanic provinces, and these volcanoes release CO2, lots of it. Estimates suggest that Jurassic volcanic outgassing adds several times more CO2 to the atmosphere per year than modern volcanism. But here's the thing. Atmospheric CO2 levels don't just keep rising indefinitely. They stabilize. Why? Because the Earth has feedback mechanisms. One of the most important is chemical weathering. When CO2 dissolves in rainwater, it forms carbonic acid, a weak acid, but enough to react with silicate rocks. This weathering process consumes CO2 and produces bicarbonate ions, which wash into the ocean. In the ocean, organisms use these bicarbonates to build calcium carbonate shells and skeletons. When those organisms die, their shells sink to the seafloor and eventually become limestone. This process, the carbonate-silicate cycle, is a planetary thermostat. More CO2 means warmer temperatures, which means faster weathering, which means more CO2 removed from the atmosphere, which eventually stabilizes the climate. In the Jurassic, this thermostat is set to warm. Volcanic outgassing is high. Weathering is high. Limestone deposition is high. And the system reaches an equilibrium at CO2 levels much higher than today's, but not so high that the planet becomes Venus. But there's another piece: organic carbon burial. When plants and algae die, most of their organic matter is decomposed, releasing CO2 back into the atmosphere or ocean. But some fraction, especially in low oxygen environments like swamps, deep ocean basins, or stagnant lagoons, gets buried before it can decompose. Over millions of years, this buried organic matter becomes coal, oil, and natural gas. The Jurassic is a time of extensive organic carbon burial. Those anoxic ocean basins we talked about earlier, they're carbon sinks. Organic matter rains down from the productive surface waters, settles into oxygen-poor depths, and gets buried in sediment. This removes carbon from the active cycle and locks it away in rocks. It's one reason why the Jurassic, despite high volcanic outgassing, doesn't spiral into runaway greenhouse conditions. And here's where it gets relevant to us. Much of the oil we extract and burn today comes from Jurassic marine deposits. The North Sea oil fields, the oil fields of the Middle East, many of these are sourced from Jurassic-aged rocks. We're burning carbon that was fixed by Jurassic phytoplankton and buried in Jurassic seas. We're, in a sense, releasing the Jurassic back into the atmosphere. This is not a political statement. It's a geological fact, and it raises a question. If we're moving atmospheric CO2 levels back toward Jurassic values, currently we're at around 420 parts per million and rising. The Jurassic was somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000 parts per million. What does that mean for Earth's climate? The answer is complicated. The Jurassic took millions of years to stabilize at high CO2 levels, and the continents were in different positions. The ocean circulation was different. The biosphere was different. We can't simply extrapolate Jurassic conditions to the modern world, but we can learn principles. We can understand how the carbon cycle responds to perturbations. We can see what a greenhouse world looks like in practice. And we can use that knowledge to inform our models and predictions. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. We're conducting an experiment on a planetary scale, and we don't have a control group. We're changing atmospheric composition faster than any natural process, except maybe a large volcanic province or an asteroid impact. And while life will undoubtedly survive, life has survived worse. The question is, what kind of life? In what configurations? And at what cost to human civilizations that depend on stable coastlines, predictable agriculture, and consistent water supplies? The Jurassic doesn't give us answers, but it gives us context. And context, in this case, might be the most valuable thing we can extract from deep time. Now, let's talk about the end, because every story has an ending, and the Jurassic is no exception. The Jurassic doesn't end with a bang. There's no asteroid impact, no supervolcanic eruption that wipes the slate clean. Instead, it ends with a transition, gradual, almost imperceptible in human terms, but real nonetheless. Around 145 million years ago, things start to shift. Sea levels, which have been high throughout much of the Jurassic, begin to fluctuate more dramatically. Climate becomes slightly more variable. And in the fossil record, we start to see turnovers. Some species disappearing, new species appearing, ecosystems reorganizing. Why? The honest answer is we don't fully know. It's probably not one thing, but a combination of factors. Tectonic activity continues to reshape continents. Ocean circulation changes as new seaways open and old ones close. Volcanic activity in some regions increases, in others decreases. And these changes, individually small, accumulate into something significant. What we do know is that by the time we cross into the Cretaceous, the world is recognizably different. The dinosaur fauna shifts. Some Jurassic lineages go extinct, others diversify. Flowering plants, which will revolutionize terrestrial ecosystems, begin their rise. Marine ecosystems reorganize as new groups of predators and prey evolve. But here's the critical thing. It's not a mass extinction. It's a transition. Most lineages persist across the Jurassic-Cretaceous boundary. The basic structure of ecosystems remains intact. Life doesn't reset, it reconfigures. And this tells us something important about how Earth systems work. Change is constant. Extinction is constant. But catastrophic, wholesale collapse is rare. Most of the time, ecosystems are resilient enough to absorb shocks, reorganize, and continue. It's only when you hit a system with something truly extraordinary, an asteroid impact, a massive volcanic province erupting in a geologically instant time frame, a catastrophic climate shift, that you get mass extinction. The Jurassic-Cretaceous transition is not one of those moments. It's just evolution in action. And that, in its own way, is more remarkable than any catastrophe. Because it shows that life, given time, will explore every possibility, fill every niche, push into every available space. Not because of any grand design or purpose, but simply because that's what life does. So where does this leave us? We've spent the better part of an hour traveling through deep time, walking alongside sauropods, diving with ichthyosaurs, watching pterosaurs skim the waves. We've explored warm oceans and conifer forests and volcanic landscapes. We've talked about carbon and climate and evolution and behavior. We've seen a world that's both alien and strangely familiar. And now, it's time to ask the big question. The question that sits at the heart of all science. So what? Why does any of this matter? Why should you care about animals that died 145 million years ago? About climates that haven't existed for longer than you can meaningfully comprehend? About ecosystems that were erased and replaced long before the first human ancestor stood upright? Here's my answer, and it's the answer that's kept me fascinated with deep time for decades. The Jurassic matters because it shows us what's possible. It shows us that Earth is not one thing, but many things. That the planet we inhabit now, with its ice caps and its grasslands and its temperate zones and its familiar cast of mammals and birds, is just one configuration among many. That the rules we think are fixed, the climate patterns, the ecosystem structures, the balances between predator and prey are contingent. They depend on specific conditions. Change those conditions, and you get a different world. And we are changing those conditions right now, faster than they've changed in 66 million years. Now, I'm not saying we're heading back to the Jurassic. We're not. The continents are in different positions. The sun is slightly hotter. The biosphere is completely different. But we are moving the carbon cycle, the climate system, and the biosphere into a state that has no recent analog. We're pushing the system into territory it hasn't explored in millions of years. And that's unsettling. But it's also a reminder that Earth is robust. It has been through this before, in different ways, in different times. It has been warmer. It has had higher CO2 levels. Life has not only survived, but thrived. The planet will be fine. The question is whether we and the ecosystems we depend on will be fine. And that's where paleontology stops being just a historical science and becomes a predictive one. Because if we understand how past ecosystems responded to climate change, to ocean acidification, to shifts in atmospheric composition, then we can make better predictions about how modern ecosystems will respond. We can identify vulnerabilities. We can anticipate tipping points. We can maybe make better decisions. The Jurassic teaches us resilience. It teaches us that life is adaptable, creative, relentless. But it also teaches us that change has consequences, that ecosystems reorganize, and in that reorganization, there are winners and losers. That the world that emerges from a period of rapid change is not the same as the world that went in. And maybe, if we're paying attention, it teaches us humility. Because for all our technology, all our intelligence, all our capacity to reshape the planet, we are still subject to the same forces that shaped the Jurassic. We are still part of the carbon cycle, still dependent on stable climates, still vulnerable to the same feedback loops that drove ancient ecosystems. We like to think we're separate from nature. We're not. We're embedded in it. And the more we understand about how nature works, not just today, but across deep time, the better equipped we are to navigate the future. So let's bring this home. Let's come back to where we started. Remember that opening image, a world of giants, of warm seas, of continents in unfamiliar positions. A world where the rules are different, where life has found solutions we don't see today, where evolution has had time, vast, unimaginable stretches of time, to experiment and innovate. That world existed. It was real as the world you're sitting in right now. And it teaches us something profound. Earth is ancient, resilient, and endlessly inventive. But it is also indifferent. It does not care about individual species, individual ecosystems, or individual civilizations. It simply responds to forces: solar radiation, greenhouse gases, tectonic movements, biological feedbacks, according to the laws of physics, chemistry, and biology. The Jurassic is a window into those laws in action. It's a laboratory where we can see the results of experiments that ran for millions of years. And if we're wise, we'll learn from those experiments. Not to prevent change. Change is inevitable. But to understand it, to anticipate it, and to adapt. Because here's the final lesson of the Jurassic. Life persists. Not because it's strong, not because it's perfectly adapted, but because it's diverse, flexible, and opportunistic. Life finds a way, as the saying goes. But the specific forms life takes, the ecosystems it builds, the balances it strikes, those are contingent on conditions. Change the conditions, and life changes too. We are living through a moment of change. Rapid, human-driven, unprecedented in its speed, if not its direction. And the Jurassic, distant and alien as it seems, offers us a mirror, a reflection of what a greenhouse world looks like, how it functions, what it makes possible, and what it costs. So the next time you see a bird outside your window, remember, you're looking at a living dinosaur, a descendant of the creatures that first took to the air in the late Jurassic forests. The next time you drive past a construction site and see sedimentary rock exposed, remember, that rock might contain the traces of a world utterly unlike our own, a world that thrived and vanished and left behind only shadows. The next time you think about climate, about ecosystems, about the future, remember, Earth has been here before. Not exactly here, but in the same territory. And it has lessons to teach if we're willing to listen. The Jurassic was not a paradise. It was a functioning biosphere with all the beauty, brutality, and complexity that implies. It was a world where a single footstep could shake the ground, where the oceans were ruled by reptiles with teeth the size of kitchen knives, where the skies were filled with creatures that had no evolutionary right to fly, but did anyway. It was, in short, magnificent, and terrifying, and real. And it's gone. erased by time, replaced by new worlds, new experiments, new configurations of life. But it's not forgotten. It lives on in the rocks, in the fossils, in the genetic legacies carried by birds and crocodiles and turtles. It lives on in the carbon we burn, the limestone we mine, the landscapes we inhabit that were shaped by forces unleashed in Jurassic seas and forests. We are, whether we realize it or not, still living in the shadow of the Jurassic, still benefiting from the ecosystems it created, still dealing with the consequences of processes it set in motion. And if we want to understand our own time, our own world, our own future, we need to understand theirs. That's why the Jurassic matters. Not because it's a curiosity, not because dinosaurs are cool, though they are, but because it's a key to understanding how planets work, how life evolves, how systems respond to change. And in a time when our own planet is changing faster than at any point in human history, that understanding is not a luxury, it's a necessity. So thank you for joining me on this journey through deep time. Thank you for spending an hour in a world that vanished millions of years before we existed. And if you take away one thing from this, let it be this: the past is not dead. It's not even past. It's woven into the present in ways we're only beginning to understand. And if we want to navigate the future successfully, we need to learn from the deep lessons written in stone, preserved in fossils, encoded in the very structure of our planet. The Jurassic happened, and it matters. Never forget that.